Welcome to everything you wanted to know about the value of a 360 assessment and now can ask. This is the second webinar in the fall 2021 DCM Associates webinar series. As you know, these sessions are free and we really want to get this information out to as many of our colleagues in the nonprofit sector as possible. I am thrilled to introduce our speaker today, Allan Weisberg. He is our firm's managing director and chief learning officer. He spent more than 30 years with Johnson & Johnson and Ethicon, and he has helped individuals and organizations and for-profit and not-for-profit sectors deal with their human resource leadership succession and staff development needs. He has a lot of experience. Some of the highlights of his experience include, and I want to make sure I get this right, graduating from Leadership New Jersey, running the Corporate United Way campaign in Somerset County, and serving on a variety of nonprofit boards, including 15 years as a member of the Board of Trustees of Atlantic Health, serving as president of Prevent Blindness New Jersey, member of the advisory board of Wharton Executive Development Programs, and a member of the advisory board of online learning at NYU and the board of governors at Union County College. So Allan, I'm thrilled to turn this over to you. I'm going to mute and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Michelle. As always, I appreciate your assistance and welcome everybody. And I look forward to talking to you about 360s, a passion about 360s and how it can be used very effectively. And I also have seen situations where it was not used effectively. So what I will try to do today is not only go over some of the information, but tell you a couple of stories in terms of experiences, in terms of great successes and things that perhaps didn't go well, because I think it's really critical, because I think the whole 360 process is a valuable process in your leadership development arsenal. Very critical to have it, and using it effectively and using it for the appropriate reasons is a great piece in terms of opening up a dialogue and really having people have the opportunity to develop really positive, substantial and valuable development plans. So what we'll discuss today is, first of all, what a 360 assessment is, and also what it's not, because I think sometimes there's perception sometimes about 360s that they're not necessarily true. How a 360 assessment can be utilized, its use in development, which is really critical in terms of, and its value. Pretty much just talking about 360 assessments in terms of using interviews and an automated process. And one of the things we want to talk about is the 360 process that we use, which is a wonderful process in terms of you get great reporting and a very easy to administer process for a low cost. And I'll try not to do too much advertising today in terms of that, but the importance of action planning, because one of the things about 360s and any kind of instrument you take is you get all this wonderful and rich data. But if you don't do anything with it, it becomes meaningless. And it's really all about what you do with the information that's important. The use of follow-up surveys in terms of how that could be a positive part of the process. Then we're going to talk about 10 keys to successfully using a 360 process. And then lastly, talk about how DCM associates can help. So ultimately what we'd like to do today is provide you information so that you have enough information, decide what you want to do. It would be great if you would like to have a 30-minute meeting and discuss our process, but even if you don't, hopefully what this is, it provides you an opportunity to understand more about 360 processes, its use, and hopefully it got you on the path of using it in an appropriate way that helps your organization. So if we go to the next slide. So what's a 360 assessment? It's not a long definition. It's a process which allows individuals to understand how their effectiveness is viewed by others. And typically, it's done with assessments by the individual, direct reports, the boss, and peers. And sometimes we have a category codes, others. Some organizations have done 360s where they use people that are not in the organization, that are maybe partners for them. And that feedback is important to the particular job. The key here is that these are based on perceptions by people. So sometimes people have the situation where they say, well, I don't agree with that and so forth. Well, the reality is that these are perceptions and it's what people believe. And, you've heard the statement being that perception is reality. Well, yes and no, but I think the reality is that when people have a perception, that's what they think and what they believe. And it's important to clearly understand. And it's a really valuable tool for people to have that kind of a process. So how 360, going to the next slide, how 360s are utilized in organizations. First of all, regular check-ins for individuals to get feedback. Often people have a situation where they might do this every 18 months or every 2 years, which is a great way. 6 to 12 months after taking a new job is a real great way. And I do a lot of work with organizations in terms of coaching where people take this after 6 to 12 months. Very critical when somebody starts a new job, clearly understanding if they're in the right path. And 6 to 12 months is about the right amount of time for an individual to start, having developed things in terms of their style and their approach, and getting feedback is really important. And it really helps that individual learn about what kind of things they can do and really help them with a development plan. Part of coaching, just about every executive coach, myself included, we really like doing 360s with people at the beginning of a process because it really helps us understand what the issues are. Sometimes leadership challenges, the person has leadership challenges in terms of that they're trying to address and getting feedback related to that. So for example, if somebody is in the midst of a change process, how is that going? That's a real understanding and appreciation. Sometimes get performance issues with the individual or perhaps organizational challenges that the organization has, and really understanding how that's all working. So it's used for a multitude of reasons. And if you go to the next slide, I think this is really speaks to something that's really important. Its use for development process only is critical. Sometimes the confidentiality is really critical. When organizations, and they've done this in the past, try to make it public, not confidential, it can bring a chilling effect for the individuals that are participating and providing input. And then you get into rating things where people are saying, gee, if you rate me this way, I'll rate you that way. And you don't want to go there, because I think it's really an important element. More and more research has been done to show that it's best used when it's used for development only, meaning information comes to the individual and they are able to work on and development plans, and then develop a process by which they work with their boss to make sure that it's part of the development plan. But I can't stress enough the importance of using this for development and using it that way rather, and it's not a rating, but rather it is, and it's not as if scores are, high scores are always good and low scores are necessarily bad. Not so. So much of it has to do with a particular job that somebody's in, and sometimes they may use certain strengths to an extreme, which are negative, and sometimes lower scores in certain areas are good, but sometimes higher scores are good. And again, it's just really based on the job and really matching that up to the individual. So if we go to the next slide. So one of the important elements of if you are going to, if you're the first time you're doing 360s in an organization or using a particular 360 tool, is really to have a process in your organization. And it starts with, as I mentioned before, confidentiality. The idea that individuals are free to give and express their feedback in a confidential manner, that it's not, somebody's not coming to them saying, who said that, or so forth, and that their feedback is respected. The role of the boss is really, really critical, because what works best is when a 360 is done by an individual and they confer with their boss and they are able to say, hey, let me tell you what I heard in the 360. And with the boss, they're able to use that information to develop development plans. And it really becomes an important part of a process, and it really opens up the dialogue. The other piece here is the responsibility of the individual. It's so important that if someone is not committed to taking the information seriously, valuing the feedback, and then taking actions appropriately, it's not a good use of anybody's time if somebody's going to take a 360 and not follow up and do the right kind of piece. Then the other question, some organizations do, I work with a couple clients who in 360s, that they require, after coaching, they require within 6 to 12 months a follow-up survey, because they also have to understand. They want to understand whether or not the feedback and the development plans and the actions are making the kinds of improvements that are going to be helpful to the individual and also helpful to the organization. Lastly, in this piece is really the idea of having an organizational rhythm. So for many people, the idea might be is you do this every year or you do this every 2 years as a 360. And it's a great thing to have in your toolbox, particularly for the key leaders in your organization that have large staffs and large teams, because it really can, if they need to get that feedback. And very often, one of the common things that I've learned throughout the years in my corporate life is that the higher up you go, the less feedback you get. And people don't want to tell you things, but the 360 process is a process by which to get it. So this idea of having an organizational rhythm and for doing this periodically is incredibly valuable. So value of the effective 360 process. First of all, getting the perspective of 4 points of feedback. First of all, your perspective, your boss, your peers, it really, and your direct reports, it's really valuable to understand the different perspectives that people have. What I found many times is that the top management is the last to know. So very often there are people that are very effective at managing up well, but don't necessarily manage down low well, and really understanding the disconnects, or that they're very good and effective at managing their team, but they're difficult to work with in terms of their peers. And when you think about organizations, it's so critical to make sure that organizations, people work across lines and they work effectively with peers. So really understanding the perspectives from all those pieces is really incredibly valuable. And it's really important to understand the gaps. It also, you're able to pinpoint real strengths and challenges, which is really important. It just tells leaders what they need to know. We live in a world where it's difficult to give people direct feedback face to face. And sometimes this confidentiality and the fact that no names are used really gives people the strength and ability to say what needs to be said, which is really very effective. It's non-threatening when used properly. And if you facilitate this well, it creates an ongoing dialogue between the boss and direct reports, which can really become valuable in terms of really making sure that you have a culture of development. So go on to the next. So I just want to talk about the 2 types of processes which I think are really valuable, and I've used many times. Sometimes you do 360s where you do interviews with each one of the participants, and the participants, it's often used by a coach, and I have used it many times, you can really very often can get to underlying issues by probing a lot of things. Sometimes the voices can be heard more clearly, and I think it's a good way of doing it sometimes. Automated, which I do very often. First of all, most importantly, easy. It's very easy to administer. Pretty much, if you and we'll show you the Telexis report that you would get at a very low cost. The number of so if you selected participants through the administrator, they'll get a letter explaining the whole process, and then we get the name and an email, and that's pretty much all you have to do, because then we contact them, we invite them to go to the link and to fill out the survey, which takes about 30 or 40 minutes. Easy to use. People have an opportunity to make comments where they think is appropriate. And it's a really effective tool. And we follow up to make sure everybody completes it. So it's a very easy way to do it. It's you get standardized data on people in terms of comparing it to the norm. It's very cost effective. There's help in terms of action planning. And the report's great. It's about 12 pages, so it's not overbearing, but it really helps people understand. And there's progress and tracking. And again, has most important about this process, it's confidential. So I think there's a lot of value sometimes using in the third party to having a third party, but interviews are very helpful, and automated is very helpful depending on your circumstance and depending on your needs of your organization. So if you look at this, the next page is we use again a Telexis, and it's based on 17 skills here, and you can see the highlights here, and it's really important and very helpful to really understand that these are really the actions in terms of it. I'm going to show you a sample report here in terms of the next pages coming up. So this is the Telexis report, and again, it shows the first pages really show the definition and how scoring is done, and in terms of the criteria and definitions, which are great. The next page, you start getting into the overall summaries, and it really gives you an opportunity to look at strengths and areas of opportunity. Again, more data that really is broken down by the different categories to really do a deep dive for the individual to understand where they're doing well and in areas and opportunities for improvement. And continuing in terms of the report. And really, one of the other things here, I'm just trying to think if I don't see it, but in terms of a comments page. There we go. It's a little light there, Michelle. That's why I had a problem there. But the comments are great. People very often will hone in on the comments. And it's really helpful to utilize the comments to understand people's perspective. A lot of times they're very encouraging things. And a lot of times they're things that are very helpful to the individual about, gee, it would be helpful if you communicated better, things like that, and that kind of process. But it's great in terms of knowing that. The other piece here really starts beginning in terms of allowing, so when the person gets all this information, is really being able to hone in on a development plan. And if you see on the right hand here, really talking about what a development plan can be and how that can necessarily can work. And if you go to the next page, it really gives you the really steps in terms of personal development plans and really using this to help people do this. And I will talk a little bit about, most often it's really important, particularly the first time somebody does this, is to have a third party participate with them in action planning, because this is a critical step. And often people need to bounce their ideas off people, but what this allows individuals to do is start thinking about the action plans before they really start talking to people, start working on action plans, which gets to our next page, which it's really about action plans, which is important. As I mentioned before, what people do with the feedback is the most important. It's so critical, I think, to have a third party to assist in terms of interpreting the data. I'll give you a classic example. I had a client, a coaching client that I had who one of the pieces of feedback I got was that they really didn't have very good presentation skills, and was not were not presenting well to upper management, which was a particular problem in this person's case because they were a company president. And when I first started talking to him, I realized the guy did a great job in terms of presenting himself and communicating. The more I talked to him and the more we talked about the feedback he got, the more I asked him a question. I asked him a question, when you're communicating, what are you communicating? He says, well, a plan. And I said, well, what plan was that? The plan that was left to him by the person before. And I said, is that your plan? Do you believe in it? And he said, well, not really. So one of the things I encouraged him to do was to go and develop his own plan for the leadership of his team. And that changed everything. And so sometimes when people look at when they look at action plans, they may look at surface things. By having somebody that is skilled to ask the kind of questions that will be helpful, it really helps the people hone in on the reality. So we could have been, in the example, if we didn't have somebody doing this, we could have spent a lot of time and a lot of training on communication skills, when the reality was he needed the knowledge and courage of what he was doing to really understand that it was really about building his own plan. And the story is, I later heard that this was a strength of his once he developed his own plan. So it's really about really clearly digging deeply in terms of having a third party to assist. And again, it can be an internal, but it can also be an external person. It's important to also have, in terms of action planning, a communication plan. And it could merely be by communicating to people that participated that you've heard the information and that you're developing an action plan. Depending on your circumstance, it may even be communicating what that action plan is about. And it's a real critical factor. And people appreciate that when they recognize that their feedback is being heard and utilized in a constructive way. Again, a third party works effectively here by making sure that people don't feel that the individual is breaching confidentiality, but really clearly thanking them and valuing their feedback. It demonstrates a lot, which is great. In terms of action plans, I think it's really critical to do that. I really encourage people to do no more than 2 to 4 action plans. 4, I very rarely do. I always, 2 or 3, because I think the more you do, it becomes a list rather than really on specific actions. And what I really feel, if you work on a couple, it does fix a lot of other areas that might be not as critical, but something that is an issue. But working on those action plans is a really powerful part of this process. Again, the whole issue of internal or external support, I think the key again is really having a third party that can assist in the action plans, which is really critical. So if you go to the next page, is really and the fundamentals of this successful 360 process and the culture around 360. First of all, confidentiality and no retaliation. I can't tell you how critical this is. Somebody goes in and has a meeting with the people and says, I got the 360. Who said that? That creates a really kind of chilling effect on the organization and the process. And the person's thinking, well, that'll be the last time I get feedback. And it's really important that the leader, there's a second piece, is the leader's open to the process and is open to the feedback. And I think it demonstrates a lot, and it demonstrates the this ability and the confidence of the leader to really make sure that they are clearly listening. Easy administration is really key to this in terms of making sure that when you have an automated process, it should go very smoothly. Any organization pretty much just needs the email addresses, and people get a note explaining the process and the confidentiality of it, and that's pretty all you need. And we follow up to make sure everybody completes the survey. Michelle does a great job of that to make sure that people within a 2-week period will do the 360s, and it's really valuable because it becomes easy to administrate. And then once everybody finishes it, we click on the computer, and it's just very quickly you're able to get a high quality report that is really valuable to the individual. Clear, good communications, clear and actionable feedback is really important. I mentioned good communications also is important. Again, use for development, not a test, is really valuable because really what you want people to do is really clearly understand that they have many strengths and many great qualities, and there's some issues that perhaps may be getting in their way, and really having the confidence and the environment by which development is valued. And I think that's really critical. The leader and the boss partnership is a critical element of this, that the boss is willing to help in terms of helping the person with their action plans. Action planning, as I mentioned, participants get feedback, and also the idea of coaching to make progress on development. And all this kind of fits into the development process. The process itself in terms of the 360 is really not that hard to do in terms of doing it. The process of making an effective 360 is all about all these steps to really make sure you create a feedback-rich organization where people value the feedback, have the confidence in their ability that they can accept the feedback, and accountability for developing actions that are based on the data. Because ultimately, you want the 360 process to be a mechanism to help leaders improve. And this is really what the process is all about. So if we go to the next slide, I just talked to you about the DCM, our support. We use the Telexis 360 administration, support, and reports. We do coaching and preparation of action plans. So that's one of the pieces we do in terms of help with people on. We do individual coaching based on identification and implementation of action plans. So all three of these, if you think about these, we can do in varying degrees. Some organizations feel that, you know what, we have the internal support to do 360s, and no, we really just need are the administration and reports, and that's fine. Some people feel they need minimal coaching that will just help people with action plans. And then sometimes organizations feel that they have leaders that really need this as part of a overall coaching exercise, which could last 3 or 6 months to help people not only develop action plans, but start implementing their action plans. The key is what we want to do is we want to help organizations where they are and what their needs are. And what we try to do is recognize in the nonprofit world, we are strongly desiring to make sure that this is really cost effective, and as equally important, meet your organizational needs. So lastly, as was mentioned before at the beginning by Michelle, I would be very happy, and I've done this with other people, do a 30-minute consultation with you in terms of what your needs are. And, it may be that it would be great and we could help you in terms of what you're doing, but at minimum, hopefully I'd have the opportunity to help you in terms of develop clarity on the subject, what you want to do, and point you in the right direction. So it'd be great to do that. And I would look forward to talking to some of you in terms of who wish to take me up on that offer. And again, no cost. And I think you'll find that kind of a consultation very worthwhile. So, questions. I've talked for about a little bit over half an hour, and I'd love to answer some questions that people have.
Alan, I've got a bunch for you today.
Great.
The first question I have is in the context of a nonprofit organization, who should be taking the 360 assessment? Who should be assessed through a 360 assessment? And how is there a frequency to it? Is this something you do once, or do you do it, on a regular basis? How does that part work?
Yeah, in an ideal world, I would start at the top of the house. If you can, your executive director doing this is very, very powerful because I think it starts modeling behavior in terms of how they act and so forth. I think there's also, in terms of the size and scope of the organization, sometimes you do it based on need, where you really have an organization where you may have somebody below the executive director who should do this, and because of feedback, or you think that, boy, this was part of the development, they may be challenged a little bit and struggling. I think that's a great process for helping people improve, which I think is really a very valuable methodology. So in an ideal world, again, the top of the house starts first because it models, but you may have specific needs that you may want to go lower because there's a specific person that really needs to do this.
Is this something that you do more than once? Is there a recommended frequency if that's the case?
Yeah, as I mentioned before about the idea of a business rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great to have a business rhythm, and really, so I think about an 18 to 24 month kind of a process, and doing it every 18 to 24 months is a really powerful way of making sure that you continue to stay accountable. If things come up, you're able to respond to them. So I think it's great not to use this as a one-off process, but rather as a process that you utilize on an ongoing basis.
Someone is asking, does the 360 replace the annual performance appraisal?
No. And really what this is really based about person's perceptions about things. And again, it's not the idea of not using, this is not rated, this is really done for developments. So I think sometimes what ends up happening is that part of the development process in a performance appraisal, you might talk about improvements and things like that. And one of the recommendations might be, you should do a 360. Let's get feedback from the people that around you to understand, how effective are you being? And I think it kind of is the next step very often after having done the performance appraisal.
There's a question about the surveys, because you mentioned that as part of the 360, lots of people in the organization at different levels take these surveys. How many people do you recommend take this survey, and from what areas of the organization?
Great question. So if an individual is going to do a survey, first of all, I think 7 to 10 people is about fine. Michelle, we've had some where we've had casts of thousands, right?
Mm-hmm, that's right. And it's
which
kind
is
of fine, because there's a follow-up question here is this something you would do with all staff or just the leadership? And we did have a situation where we did a lot of members of the staff. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I really think 7 to 10 is appropriate. And it's really designed, when you talk about reports, really direct reports, because those are the people that when you start getting into different levels of management, you start talking about, really, isn't that part of an employee survey process, which is a discussion for another day. Mm-hmm. But really about 7 to 10 people, the direct reports, your peers, in terms of people who you work with, and then people in terms of your boss, which is really important sometimes. And organizations take different shape and form. Now, the other thing that we want to be sensitive to in terms of doing this is something where we could help you on, in terms of how you did this. But so, for example, if let's say it's a little bit more, but let's say somebody has 9 direct reports, and you say, well, we should only do 4 or 5. But you say to yourself, you know what? If we only ask 4 or 5 for feedback, are the other 4 going to feel, gee, we haven't considered them? I would in that particular example have all 9 people do the 360, because you just want to make sure that you get the valuable feedback and people feel as if their voice is being heard. But also try to differentiate this from an employee survey, which you might get the whole organization to participate in.
And just to clarify, when you say doing it, because I know I sometimes get confused too, what you're talking about is people asking your direct reports to respond to the surveys for their supervisor's 360.
Correct. Yeah,
Now,
that's right.
One of the questions I think is asking, would you have a 360 assessment done for a large portion of your staff? In other words, having, each member, like having 10 members of your staff, having the 360 assessment where they're asking people to evaluate them.
Yeah, I think it's a great process. We Michelle remembers very well. We did this with one organization, and I think it was 10 people, wasn't it?
It was a lot. Yeah, I know. I probably blanked some of that out of my memory because it was so confusing.
We had 10 people doing 360s at the same time. Now, when you do a large number at one time, you want to be careful in terms of, you want to make sure we don't have fatigue by people that are actually filling out the survey. So sometimes what we do is we try to understand who is on everybody's list to make sure that they're not having to fill out 10.
Yeah.
We also try to give more
We
time.
can stagger the timing too, which is
exactly. And one of the things we really encourage people to do, one of the things we point to people is say, don't sit down and do 10 in one day, because what will happen by the 4th or 5th, you're going to forget who you're evaluating, and you're just going to get tired of doing it. So spreading it out over time is a valuable process. But and we've also done it in ways where you may do 2 or 3 at a time, and then 2 or 3 at a time, and so forth. I think the key, excuse me, is every organization is different. And I think you have to, we would ask a number of questions about what you're trying to achieve and whether or not it might be valuable to do this. In the process we just did, which was really effective, is that these were all reports to an executive director of a nonprofit. And then what happened is, once it was completed, the report was completed, I facilitated a 3-way conversation with myself, the executive director, and the individual. And the comment and the conversation was about the individual talking what they heard in the 360, the action plans they want to take, and the executive director talking about how she could support them as individuals in terms of their development plan. And it was very, very effective, because I think she really got an understanding and appreciation more of who they are, what their goals are, what their actions are, and what kind of things to have discussions about on an ongoing basis. So it really became very powerful.
Allan, there's a question about whether a 360 would be an appropriate thing to do a 360 assessment on a board chair, about a board chair. Again,
great question. I love these questions. Yes, we've done several of those, and it's great. And again, the categories are a little different because they don't necessarily have a boss. But typically what we do is we have those people surveyed, and they ask the board members and then senior staff who they work with, which might be the executive director, it might be the CFO, it might be the head of HR, but again, based on the individual and the difference. And what I did is I coached gave the person the feedback, summarized the data, and coached the chairman of the board to have a discussion with his board about what he heard and what actions he needed to make. And, there were some real positive things, and again, some areas of improvement. and he developed some action plans, and that went very well. And it brings up the issue of really making sure that the board members are being heard, that the chairman is listening to them and understanding the sensitivities in an organization. And so I think it's great. It's a great way to do that. And excuse me, I'm going to close the window. Hopefully it helps a little bit. We'll be over in a second in terms of their blowing grass.
Yeah, it's
Blowing
usually
grass
like
outside.
webinar time is when my neighbor's landscapers show up, to be sure.
But it's really a great way. It is really a great way for the board chair to get information. Actually, what we've also done is the board chair and the chief executive officer both did them at the same time. And again, that's another powerful way of doing it, because it really demonstrates to the organization that they are really interested in feedback. They get valuable information, and it role models the kind of behavior that is really important for organizations to recognize that they are looking for ways to develop their skills more. So isn't that a great thing for each person in the organization to do? So top down is always a great way, and chairman, it is a great way, and we've had some very, very nice experiences with chairmen who have done the 360, and they found it incredibly helpful.
Alan, someone's asking, like, in addition to, I think, modeling from the top of your organizations, from the top of the organization, for an organization that has never done this before, and it feels like a very new thing, what other recommendations might you have for introducing this into their culture?
Well, I think, again, the top down would be a great way of doing this, in terms of the leader doing it, in terms of doing it and taking it through a process where they talk about what they heard and what actions they're doing. So I think it's, again, this modeling of behavior and using it to their advantage in terms of getting a great result. Nothing works better than getting a great result with people. And I think the more you could do that, that's really incredibly important. The other is really creating that environment of confidentiality. And I would really recommend in a situation like that is to use an automated process, because there's much less, there's not much opportunity to get into confidentiality. But I think it's all those things that are factor. I think the top-down approach and real using it to your advantage is really the best way. And I would suggest that an organization is, I had a boss that used to have a philosophy. He used to say to me, do a little, learn a lot. And very often you try this out with somebody, you work with somebody in the organization that has done this and really done it well. And are you going to make a couple of mistakes at the beginning? Sure, but you learned a lot, and it just makes you're able to take it to the next level by learning a little bit and understanding it, and recognizing the value that this process brings to the organization.
Can you talk a little bit more about the services that you offer when someone signs on to have a 360 done? But
Sure.
do you spend time explaining the report? Is there additional coaching?
So there's really three levels of support. We've kind of looked at it and said the bronze, the silver, the gold. I don't know in terms of categories, but let's take it from the least involvement to the more involvement. The least involvement is that we would do the 360, set up the administration. The individual will get the report. I would do an hour's worth of work with the individual to help them decipher the report and action plan, and in terms of and guide them in terms of how to do the action plan. But again, that's a short amount of work. The second, which would be kind of a medium amount of work, would be all the above, plus several more hours in terms of action planning. And then a third way would really be executive coaching, which is really a 3 or 6 month process with more hours of work, which part of the process is a 360, which is really helping an person really not only develop action plans, but helping them implement the action plans and really assisting them until, helping them in terms of being successful. And frankly, we have organizations that do all, differently in terms of different places on the spectrum. And again, what we try to do is we try to work with the organization to help them understand what their needs are and develop the most cost-effective process that is needed in your organization. Hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, and Alan, I think what I'm going to speak with Dennis about doing when we send our follow-up with the recording is to include some basic pricing information. Obviously, it all depends on how much consulting someone wants to go along with the 360, but I suspect that this is more accessible than you might think out of the gate. So I want to make sure that people have information about that so that they see that this maybe is something that they can do where they otherwise would think, oh, gee, that's, too expensive for us.
Yep. Yeah. And again, we have a lot of experience in this in terms of working with nonprofit. Look, I worked in the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector, and I recognize there's a difference. And, look, there's some very large nonprofits. For example, I was served on a board of a hospital. Well, they had 10,000 employees in terms of the healthcare system. And, so those are one extreme. And then there's nonprofits that might have 4 full-time employees, which is very, so there's different extremes and understanding that and appreciate them. And then also, really the other element of this is really clearly understanding the needs of the organization and what the needs are in terms of moving forward.
Well, that wraps up our questions. I think I have a public service announcement about our upcoming.
Great.
Yes, I did put that where I thought it was going to be. So I hope that you're planning to join us for one of these upcoming webinars. I'm going to put this link. Oh no, I'm not. Let me go back. I will be sure that my next communication to you includes the links for the upcoming webinars. And at the end of our fall series, I will be circulating recordings of everything. And I can see that my PowerPoint has just decided to be very slow for me. There we go. So the next one is coming up on the 17th, the transformational competencies every nonprofit leader needs to be successful. We've got in December, executive nonprofit leadership and performance evaluation and assessment, which really speaks to some of the other areas that you were talking about besides the 360, Alan. So we'll definitely spend time covering those options and very financially accessible opportunities for you as well. And we've got a session coming up on a topic that I think comes up regularly. It's been coming up since I entered the nonprofit sector 30 years ago, ethical nonprofit fundraising, and that will be offered by our colleague, Greg Nielsen. So I hope you'll be able to join. If you don't think you can make it, register anyway. We will send you the recording. And this is just an overview of all of the services that DCM Associates offers with regard to nonprofit leadership and board performance. We have executive leadership and board online assessment surveys. These are separate from the 360. We have a chief executive officer performance evaluation. Again, that is separate from the 360. I just want to go back though, the executive leadership and board governance online assessment survey combines perspectives of your executive leadership and your board, which is a very nice way to determine if you're all moving in the same direction and on the same track. You can see over to the right, and I think I'll include this brochure as well with our next communication. We have packages that you can order that will give you some or all of these tools to use for your organization. And again, we try to keep it very, very accessible for all sizes of organizations. We also have our Dennis's online courses, how to become a high-performing nonprofit board and how to become a high-performing nonprofit executive leadership team. And we offer coaching with and without these tools. So I think that Dennis and the other members of the firm have really tried to put together a comprehensive selection of services and tools to help your organization become high performing. And you're probably already on Dennis's email list, but if you're not, be sure to text Dennis to 22828 and we'll get you on that list so that you get all of these things right to your mailbox. So I want to thank everyone. Allan, thank you so much for a great presentation.
My pleasure.
I think we were able to share. I see the thank yous. Everyone really appreciates the information. So everyone have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you at our next event.